You know how the daily news just feels incredibly noisy right now? Like everything around us is fracturing, and it's so easy to just get completely lost in that daily chaos? Well, in this explainer, we're going to step back, way back. Our goal today is to fundamentally change how you perceive global events by looking past the surface. We're going to examine the hidden architecture of how our world actually moves, establishing a much more calm, structural view of reality.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you look at the daily news cycle, you're constantly bombarded with massive, overwhelming crises. You've got exponential AI scaling, severe power grid constraints, logistics and supply chain bottlenecks, geopolitical fragmentation, water shortages, and on top of it all, cognitive overload. And the thing is, the media presents all of these to us as completely isolated emergencies, just separate, broken pieces of a failing world.
I want you to just pause and think about that for a second. What if we've been looking at this entirely the wrong way? What if these are not separate problems at all?
Which brings us to the layered civilization. To truly understand what the data is showing us, we have to transition away from that chaos of current events and look at the hidden architecture underneath.
You see, our world is actually a massive interconnected stack. At the very base, the planet feeds into energy. That powers infrastructure, which supports AI, which then influences the state, all of it relying on the human care layer at the top. And together, this forms civilization. Now, the profound takeaway here is the structural relationship. A change in one foundational layer absolutely does not just stay there. It structurally propagates, moving upward and downward through the entire stack.
And this brings us to a really critical concept. If we want to understand this operating system, we have to stop looking at isolated events and start looking for what's called a pressure gradient. A pressure gradient is basically a structural stress flowing through this interconnected system. It's a lot like water searching for a crack in a dam. When we shift our perspective to look for these flowing gradients instead of standalone events, the apparent chaos of the world suddenly makes mechanical sense.
Let's look at AI as a system catalyst. It is the perfect example of our era to see exactly how this works in practice.
We need to stop viewing AI as merely a technological trend, because in the context of our civilization's operating system, it's a massive physical force. This brilliantly illustrates how a pressure gradient flows. First, the massive compute demand for AI fundamentally spikes the energy load. I mean, we are literally seeing data centers demand the output of entire nuclear power plants. That downward pressure builds immense stress on our physical infrastructure. Then, that stress triggers state and government intervention to secure resources. Capital concentrates, and ultimately all of that societal restructuring places massive, crushing pressure on the human care layer at the very end of the line.
This cascade proves something incredibly profound. AI has completely transcended being just software. Because of how heavily it presses down on energy and infrastructure, and how forcefully that pushes up into the state and care layers, AI is fundamentally rewiring the operating system of our world. It is now structurally connected to civilization itself.
But that physical stack is really only half of the story. There's another layer that overlaps those physical components, the cognitive loop. Human perception and thought aren't separate from civilization. They are vital mechanical components of it. This cognitive loop is a 5-part cycle. We start with reality, which leads to observation. Then comes interpretation, which drives a decision, and that finally culminates in execution. This is the systematic way that you and I, that all human beings, operate within and respond to those physical layers we just talked about.
And right here is where we hit a massive structural phase shift. AI is no longer just processing static data on a server farm somewhere. It is beginning to enter this cognitive loop directly. It's actually being hardwired into our observation, our interpretation, and our decision-making loops. It is literally merging the physical infrastructure stack with the human cognitive cycle.
This merger of the physical and the cognitive brings us to the structural shift. It forces us to completely update our mental models of reality.
So the crucial point here is distinguishing the illusion from reality. The prevailing illusion is that civilization is just becoming more complicated, right? That we're drowning in an overwhelming number of separate problems. But the data points to a totally new reality. Civilization is becoming incredibly more interconnected. We don't necessarily have more independent problems, it's that the density of connection between our layers has dramatically increased.
Because of this dense interconnectivity, there are very real, severe physical consequences. When you try to partially optimize just one isolated issue, you inevitably create global instability.
An improvement in the AI layer might completely crush a local energy layer. Delayed problems in, say, shipping logistics suddenly erupt as political crises in the state layer. And as this connection density peaks, human cognition stops being the operator and risks becoming mere infrastructure within the machine itself.
We have firmly entered the age of the civilization OS. It's no longer merely society. It is an operating system of interconnected physical pressure and human cognition.
In this new age, the questions we ask absolutely must change. It's a trap to look at an issue and try to figure out what is correct, or how do we solve this one isolated problem. True understanding now comes from asking a completely different question. Which layer is transmitting pressure into another? We have to start observing the structural stress flowing across the entire system.
Which leads us to a deeply provocative question about human agency. Think about it. If our cognition is really just another layer in this massive interconnected stack of flowing pressures, are we actually operating civilization anymore? Or are we simply components constantly reacting and responding to the pressure gradients moving inside the civilization OS?
I want to leave you with this final thought from the research. It's a realization that, honestly, completely shifts how you watch the news, how you view the economy, and how you understand technology moving forward. Perhaps the world did not become incomprehensible. Perhaps it simply became connected. Our observation of the civilization OS is very much ongoing. The system is constantly shifting, the pressures are always moving, and we are really just beginning to map the true architecture of our world. I hope this explainer has sparked a lasting cognitive shift for you today, and hopefully from now on, you'll start to see the world not as a series of broken pieces, but as one beautifully, sometimes overwhelmingly, connected whole. Keep observing the structure,